Growth isn't an abstract idea. It's biological. It's embedded in the very circuitry of your brain and body, waiting to be activated, not by ease, but by difficulty. The most profound adaptations come not from avoiding stress, but by engaging with it deliberately and systematically. Doing hard things mentally, physically, and emotionally is the key signal the brain uses to remodel itself for greater resilience, capacity, and strength. Voluntary discomfort is one of the most powerful tools for driving neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience. When you deliberately engage in challenging activities, whether physical, cognitive, or emotional, you signal to your nervous system that adaptation is necessary. This is not the same as experiencing stress passively or involuntarily. The key difference lies in agency. When you choose the discomfort, when you step into difficulty with intention, the brain interprets that experience very differently than if the same challenge were imposed on you without choice. Voluntary discomfort activates areas of the brain responsible for learning and self-directed change, specifically the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and the basal ganglia. These areas begin encoding new circuits to better manage the type of challenge you're facing, making you more efficient and capable over time. At the cellular level, engaging in hard things triggers the release of neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine. These chemicals prime neurons to fire more precisely and to form stronger connections with one another. This leads to long-term potentiation, the strengthening of synapses that form the basis of learning and habit change. Importantly, these neuroplastic changes don't occur during rest. They are initiated during high-friction moments when the brain is being pushed just beyond its comfort zone. So when you find yourself in a state of physical strain, emotional discomfort, or cognitive overload, and you stay present with it instead of backing off, you are literally training your brain to grow and adapt. The discomfort becomes the signal for plasticity, and the brain responds by reorganizing itself for improved function. Voluntary hardship also disrupts default neural patterns, those automatic habitual pathways that dictate much of our behavior. When you choose to act outside of those patterns, such as pushing through fatigue or having a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it, the brain is forced to recruit new networks. This process opens the door for change because it breaks the loop of predictable outcomes and encourages new strategies for problem solving, persistence, and emotional control. It is through these new neural pathways that real transformation occurs. And with each repetition, those pathways become stronger, more efficient, and eventually automatic. There's also a profound interaction between the body and the brain during these experiences. Physical discomfort, like the kind experienced during cold exposure, high rep resistance training, or intense cardiovascular exertion, sends strong interoceptive signals through the vagus nerve and spinal cord to the brainstem and limbic system. These signals are interpreted as stress, but because the context is voluntary, the brain simultaneously activates mechanisms of control and regulation. This strengthens the bridge between top, down, and bottom up signaling in the brain, allowing for greater emotional regulation, impulse control, and decision-making under pressure. Over time, this process builds a nervous system that is not only more tolerant of stress, but actually thrives in the presence of it. The more frequently you expose yourself to difficulty on your own terms, the more plastic and adaptive your brain becomes. Effort-driven dopamine release is one of the most misunderstood yet transformative aspects of human performance and mental resilience. Dopamine is not simply a reward chemical that is released when you achieve something or receive pleasure. It is deeply tied to the pursuit of goals, to the process of effort itself. When you voluntarily engage in a difficult task and push through friction, your brain responds by releasing dopamine in a controlled and sustainable way. This reinforces the act of striving rather than just the outcome, effectively rewiring your nervous system to find motivation in the challenge rather than waiting for a result. Over time, this biological reinforcement loop trains you to crave effort, making hard work feel satisfying and even enjoyable in a very real neurochemical sense. This mechanism is evolutionarily ancient. In our ancestors, the pursuit of food safety and shelter required sustained physical effort and focus. The brain learned to release dopamine not just when a reward was obtained, but during the pursuit of it in order to maintain drive and survival behavior. The modern nervous system still operates on that same principle, whether it's a long run, a focused writing session, or a rigorous mental challenge. When you lean into the difficulty, your brain marks that engagement as valuable by releasing dopamine. That release signals to the rest of the system, this is worth doing again. And the more often you engage in effort and receive that neurochemical feedback, the more your baseline dopamine system recalibrates to be less dependent on quick wins or external rewards. This is critically important in a world flooded with passive dopamine spikes from social media, processed foods, and constant digital stimulation. These artificial highs spike dopamine abruptly and cause a steep crash afterward, leading to dysregulation, irritability, and low motivation. In contrast, effort-driven dopamine builds resilience because it trains the brain to seek and find satisfaction in deep, meaningful engagement. It doesn't just elevate dopamine temporarily, it improves receptor sensitivity and function over time, enhancing motivation, mood, and focus on a long-term basis. The mechanism behind this process involves midbrain dopamine neurons that project to the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex regions associated with anticipation, planning, and sustained effort. As these circuits get more active and efficient through repetition, your threshold for discomfort increases. You begin to feel more motivated in situations that used to seem hard. This is not because the challenges have become easier, but because your nervous system has learned to derive pleasure from effort itself. This self-reinforcing cycle of effort, dopamine release, and neural adaptation is a critical ingredient for growth in any domain. Whether you're training your body, learning a new skill, or pushing through a creative block, it's the ability to stay with the process, especially when it's uncomfortable, that determines long-term success. And when the brain begins to link that process with its internal reward system, what once felt difficult becomes your new baseline for engagement. This is how grit is built biologically, not just through willpower, but through consistent interaction between effort and reward deep within the dopaminergic system. Stress-induced neurochemicals like epinephrine and adrenaline are often misunderstood as signals of danger or overwhelm, but in the context of controlled, voluntary challenges, they serve as powerful tools for focus, learning, and adaptive performance. When you initiate a difficult task, whether it's a physical workout, a cognitively demanding problem, or an emotionally charged interaction, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. This leads to a cascade of biological responses, including increased heart rate, heightened alertness, and the release of epinephrine from the adrenal medulla. At the same time, noradrenaline is released from the locus coeruleus in the brainstem, a key center for regulating arousal and attention. These chemicals act quickly and powerfully, sharpening your perception, narrowing your focus, and preparing your brain and body to meet the demand at hand. What's important to understand is that this state of heightened alertness is not inherently negative. In fact, it is the necessary precursor for many forms of learning and adaptation. The brain takes in information most efficiently when it is in a moderately stressed state, because this is when neuroplasticity is primed. The presence of epinephrine increases the signal to noise ratio in neural circuits, making relevant stimuli stand out more sharply while irrelevant inputs are suppressed. This enhances cognitive processing, decision-making, and situational awareness. In a very real sense, these neurochemicals are the body's way of saying, pay attention, this moment matters. And when you repeatedly place yourself in these states under voluntary control, your system gets better at accessing and regulating them without tipping into overwhelm. Epinephrine also plays a role in enhancing memory consolidation. When a moment is coupled with high arousal, the emotional intensity tags it as significant, leading to deeper encoding in the hippocampus and amygdala. This is why we often remember events tied to strong emotions or stress, and it's also why learning under moderate stress tends to be more durable. When you embrace a hard task and allow your body to enter that activated state, you're not just performing, you're embedding the experience more deeply into your neurocognitive framework. The system learns not just the task itself, but how to handle that level of intensity in the future with more control. Adrenaline also supports physical performance by increasing blood flow to muscles, dilating airways, and mobilizing energy stores like glucose and fatty acids. But when paired with mental effort, this same chemistry enhances endurance of focus and emotional regulation. Over time, consistent exposure to this internal state leads to what is sometimes called stress adaptation. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis becomes more efficient. The body learns how to rise to a challenge and then recover quickly afterward. This builds what could be described as a flexible nervous system, one that doesn't panic under pressure, but engages and then rebalances. The ability to recognize and work with these stress-induced chemicals rather than resist them is a trainable skill. You begin to understand that the elevated heart rate, the heightened breath, the sense of urgency are not signs to escape, but signs that your brain and body are entering the exact state needed for growth and transformation. Repeated exposure to controlled adversity fundamentally alters the architecture and function of the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for executive control, focus, planning, and emotional regulation. This area serves as the command center for navigating complexity, overriding impulsive responses, and maintaining goal-directed behavior. When you intentionally engage with difficult tasks, particularly those that generate some level of internal friction or discomfort, you are essentially training the prefrontal cortex to become more robust and more efficient. Just as muscle tissue strengthens in response to resistance, this region of the brain strengthens its synaptic networks through repeated engagement with mental, emotional, or physical challenge. The mechanism begins with demand. The moment you do something hard, something that requires effort beyond automatic processing, the prefrontal cortex activates to regulate competing impulses, modulate emotional reactivity, and sustain attention. Whether it's staying present in a difficult conversation, resisting the urge to quit during a physically demanding set, or working through mental fatigue to complete a complex task, these moments force the prefrontal cortex to engage more deeply. Over time, this builds greater connectivity within the brain's executive networks, particularly between the prefrontal cortex and regions like the anterior cingulate cortex and insula, both involved in detecting conflict and integrating internal bodily states. Controlled adversity also enhances myelination of neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex. Myelin is the insulating layer that surrounds axons and facilitates faster transmission of electrical signals between neurons. When a pathway is used repeatedly, especially under focused and effortful conditions, myelination increases, making the circuit more efficient and responsive. This means that when similar challenges arise in the future, the brain requires less energy and time to respond skillfully. You become faster at evaluating, deciding, and acting. But more importantly, you become more stable under pressure because your prefrontal networks are better trained to regulate the emotional and behavioral outputs of subcortical structures like the amygdala and hypothalamus. Another critical adaptation involves neurochemical modulation. Difficult tasks, when repeated with intention and purpose, alter the release patterns of neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin in the prefrontal cortex. This results in improved mood regulation, better reward prediction, and enhanced motivation during sustained effort. The prefrontal cortex essentially becomes more chemically resilient, meaning it can maintain functionality and clarity even when stress hormones are elevated. This biochemical stability is one of the cornerstones of mental toughness, allowing individuals to remain calm, focused, and decisive even in chaotic or high-stakes environments. Training the prefrontal cortex through repeated adversity also increases something called cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift strategies, perspectives, or behaviors in response to new information or changing conditions. This is an essential skill for problem solving and long-term success, and it emerges most reliably in people who frequently engage with controlled, meaningful difficulty. These experiences teach the brain that discomfort is not a threat but a signal to adapt. The more frequently that signal is paired with action, the more the prefrontal cortex grows in complexity and efficiency. What was once overwhelming becomes manageable, and what was once challenging becomes an opportunity to refine and grow. Further conflict processing regions like the anterior cingulate cortex become more capable and responsive through consistent exposure to voluntary stress, especially when an individual deliberately leans into difficult tasks rather than avoiding them. The anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, plays a critical role in detecting conflict, assessing internal and external tension, and signaling the need for cognitive control. It acts as an internal monitoring system, constantly evaluating whether your current behavior aligns with your goals and whether adjustments are necessary. When you do hard things, when you push through resistance, regulate your emotions under pressure, or maintain focus through discomfort, you repeatedly activate this region, causing it to strengthen over time through neuroplasticity. This strengthening is both structural and functional. Structurally, the neural circuits within the ACC increase in density and connectivity, particularly between the ACC and the prefrontal cortex. This connectivity enables more seamless communication between emotion detecting regions and executive control regions. It allows for faster detection of errors, greater awareness of emotional shifts, and more rapid implementation of corrective behavior. Functionally, the ACC becomes more efficient at recognizing when you are off track, when your actions don't align with your long-term goals, and then signaling the rest of the brain to correct course. This is especially relevant during difficult moments when the temptation to quit or avoid discomfort is high. A well-trained ACC detects that impulse and collaborates with other brain regions to override it, creating the space for persistence and focus. One of the most powerful aspects of repeated exposure to hard things is that it desensitizes the brain's alarm systems without dulling their functionality. The ACC works closely with the insula and amygdala to monitor bodily signals and emotional intensity. During early exposures to stress, these areas may become hyperactive, triggering a cascade of stress responses. But over time, with intentional and repeated effort, the ACC learns to modulate these signals, allowing the individual to stay present in challenging conditions without becoming overwhelmed. This modulation builds not only resilience, but also clarity under pressure. The person becomes capable of maintaining situational awareness, emotional regulation, and decision-making even when the system is flooded with arousal signals. The ACC is also deeply involved in error prediction and behavioral adjustment. When you fail, stumble, or fall short during a hard task, and then choose to get up and re-engage, you are training your conflict monitoring systems to anticipate challenge and adapt quickly. These micro adjustments are encoded in real time, reinforcing the brain's ability to fine-tune effort, attention, and strategy. This feedback loop is how high-performance individuals are able to operate effectively under high loads. Their ACC has been sculpted through repetition, feedback, and continual voluntary exposure to struggle. The neurochemical environment of the ACC also adapts over time. Levels of dopamine, glutamate, and serotonin shift in response to sustained challenge, improving motivation, cognitive control, and mood regulation in high conflict situations. These shifts are not the result of positive thinking or external reward, but of direct interaction with adversity. Each time you engage your willpower and effort in response to a hard task, you're not just getting mentally tougher, you're literally remodeling a key part of your brain that governs persistence, clarity, and behavioral accuracy. Interoceptive awareness, the ability to perceive and interpret internal bodily signals, increases significantly through repeated engagement with difficult experiences, particularly those that generate physiological strain or emotional intensity. This awareness is regulated by a network of brain regions, including the insular cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the somatosensory areas. When you deliberately choose to do hard things, whether it's enduring cold exposure, pushing through intense physical exertion, or staying focused during mental fatigue, you train your nervous system to tune into and interpret subtle changes in heart rate, breath, muscle, tension, and emotional shifts. These internal cues, once recognized and understood, become tools for self-regulation, allowing you to better manage stress, optimize performance, and maintain control under pressure. Interoception is foundational to mental toughness because it creates a feedback loop between the body and the brain. When you are exposed to discomfort, such as the burn of a final sprint or the rising anxiety during a challenging conversation, your body sends signals to the brain indicating a change in homeostasis. If those signals are misinterpreted as danger or overwhelm, the brain may initiate a fight or flight response. But when those same signals are experienced within the context of voluntary challenge and the individual remains engaged rather than fleeing or avoiding, the brain learns a new association. It begins to view these signals as part of adaptive effort, not something to fear. This reclassification changes how future stress is interpreted and allows you to function with more clarity and composure in high-demand situations. The insular cortex plays a central role in integrating these internal signals with emotional and cognitive processing. When repeatedly activated during controlled difficulty, it enhances your capacity to map bodily states with precision. You start to notice early signs of fatigue before they become overwhelming. You sense the onset of stress and can respond proactively rather than reactively. Over time, this improves your ability to self-regulate in real time because you are operating from an internal sense of balance and not waiting for external cues or breakdowns to intervene. This kind of self-regulation is critical for high performance as it enables sustained focus, energy conservation, and emotional stability even under pressure. Breath work, cold exposure, and endurance training are powerful modalities for developing interoceptive awareness because they produce strong, measurable internal signals that must be consciously regulated. When you train in these domains with intention, you enhance the neural circuits responsible for tracking interoceptive data, and you gain access to deeper levels of control over your autonomic nervous system. This is the system responsible for heart rate, respiration, and digestion, and although it is typically unconscious, it can be modulated through trained awareness. The result is not only greater physical resilience, but also a profound sense of agency over your internal state, which translates to improved emotional resilience and cognitive performance. Repeatedly facing discomfort also rewires your interpretation of bodily signals. Instead of viewing a racing heart as anxiety, you begin to read it as readiness. Instead of perceiving muscle fatigue as a sign to stop, you interpret it as a cue that adaptation is occurring. This shift in perception, grounded in increased interoceptive awareness, builds a deeper connection between the mind and body, creating a unified system that performs more efficiently under stress and recovers faster after effort.